So if we look at natural resources, the way natural resources is based is it calls for the development of stewardship plans when it comes to natural resources in the park. And I should emphasize that stewardship just doesn't mean harvesting. Stewardship also means looking after. It also means taking care of conservation. It also means developing plans for species at risk. It means identification of Mi'kmaq species of concern. Uh, Black ash is something that federally is not listed as a species at risk. However, it is considered a species at risk by Mi'kmaq for cultural purposes. So therefore, Mi'kmaq can develop their own sense of what is a species of concern or species at risk and requires a special stewardship plan within the park, not one based on harvest, but based on conservation, recovery, and reestablishment. The other thing we have to worry about clearly within a national park is conservation and public safety. National parks at their beginning were set up as areas that were identified for the conservation of nature and for the conservation of the resources there. But one of the things, as I said, that the Mi'kmaq brought into this arrangement was the Mi'kmaq understanding that harvest is a part of conservation. That harvest, done properly, done within the cultural norms of what Mi'kmaq have always done, are an integral part of the way that the land and the resources operate and sustain themselves on the land. So when we dealt with the Cape Breton Highlands National Park, one of the things that always came up is parks saying, do we wish to reintroduce predators into the national park? What they were talking about were things like wolves or others. What the Mi'kmaq harvesters came forward and said is, our harvesting plays the role of predators. That our harvesting done properly keeps these populations at an appropriate spot. And so that's what led to the initial pilot project we did on the harvest of moose in Cape Breton Highlands National Park. And I know we're dealing with the moose issue now and the population of the moose in Cape Breton Highlands. But what I want to remind people is the population of moose within the national park has stayed consistent throughout the counts. It's the moose population outside the park that has had a dramatic fall. So our discussion is, because of the work that the Mi'kmaq have been doing with national parks on moose management, we can see the benefits of that by seeing that the moose population in the park seems to be at a stable level. Having said that, it's obviously a point of concern. We know that in talking about the moose. We can't just harvest without understandings of what the effects of that harvest are going to be. How many animals are there? What's the health of the animals? How many animals can be taken and still provide a sustainable, healthy population? What types of animals should be taken to provide a healthy and sustainable population? And as we've said in the arrangement, this isn't just information that you get from science. This is also critical to get the information from Mi'kmaq. Mi'kmaq who utilize the highlands, who harvest in the highlands, have a vast wealth of information about the moose population and what is healthy and what is not healthy with the moose population in the highlands. And I'm using that just as an example, and I would expand that to all of the national parks and historic sites throughout Nova Scotia. Parks is finally learning the value of the information that they can get gathered from Mi'kmaq who have been to that spot every year, year after year, and can tell you all of the changes that have taken place, not just with the moose population, but with the entirety of the ecosystem of the area, and can tell you thoughts they have on what is working and what is not working with protection of the animals. We need to bring that into the park system. If a park is going to be truly a place where you can look after an environment and a landscape, to the Mi'kmaq, that is a working, living environment and landscape, with Mi'kmaq being a part of the way that that landscape operates. It's not the Western view of you separate this place out and you stand back and you look over nature like you're out here and nature's down here. And that's been the problem with parks in the past, and some of the problems that parks have gotten themselves into. The other thing is the relationship of Mi'kmaq to the resources, animals, plants, the landscape, the forest, the waters, is an integral part of the culture, the language, and the understanding of what it is to be Mi'kmaq in this landscape. You cannot look at any of the national parks or national historic sites without understanding how did these places inform the culture and language and understanding of the Mi'kmaq over thousands of years. That's a problem in parks today. If you drive into Cape Breton Highlands National Park, is there anything that connects you to that being a Mi'kmaq place? There's no language, no place names. There's no discussion of the way the Mi'kmaq not only used, because that's the problem. Sometimes it's here's how the Mi'kmaq used this place, to make it sound like they did this a long time ago, but they don't do it anymore. How is it that the Mi'kmaq used and use and will use this place culturally for the importance of Mi'kmaq? That has to start being expressed within national parks. If we go into Keji, we know the connection of Mi'kmaq to Keji, but is it still really spelled out in a way that shows how the Mi'kmaq would have looked at this particular area? And last of all, remember, we talk about national parks, but we're also talking about historic sites. So Citadel Hill. This applies to Citadel Hill as much as it applies to everyone else. Where in Citadel Hill is there a notion that the Mi'kmaq were here? What part did Citadel Hill play in Mi'kmaq history? Not just British history or French history, but Mi'kmaq history. We have a lot of people that can tell us. And why isn't that story being told? Why isn't that story being told to the millions of visitors that come into a place like the Citadel? They don't have to be out in Keji, and they don't have to be out at Cape Breton Highlands National Park or Lewisburg. They can be in the city at the Citadel, and they should have a full understanding and discussion around the part that the Mi'kmaq not only played, but still play within this landscape in this area. So with hunting and fishing and gathering, what we developed is just one single stewardship plan. First, we started off trying to figure out, do we have to have a bunch of stewardship plans, and do we have to do this, and we have to do that? And finally, we had some people at helping try to put it together. And they said, look, the treaties talk about hunting, fishing, gathering. So let's create a stewardship plan that's for hunting, fishing, gathering. Because if we're implementing rights, let's implement the rights they said we should be implementing. So what we have is a single stewardship plan for hunting, fishing, gathering. What it's based on when it comes to fishing is it's based on the idea that there may be some species that we shouldn't be harvesting because they're a species at risk or a species of Mi'kmaq concern. So the Mi'kmaq can identify those going forward, they can figure it out, and those would be species that would not be harvested. They can figure out species that are of a conservation concern, but there can be some harvest. if we do it based on a very specific management plan. So looking at salmon in Cape Breton Highlands National Park in the Shetty Camp River, developing a specific river management plan that would look at how would you develop salmon harvest and management and conservation on that river. Maybe you don't harvest, maybe you do. That'll be up to the community members on the technical committees and the joint board to figure out. We're looking at eel in Kedgie. One of the things about Kedgie is there are so many dams on the river system that lead into Kedgie. We have no idea what the effect of that is on the eel population being able to make it into Kedgie for its life cycle. So what's being proposed is looking at specific studies and understandings of the way that the eel life cycle is making its way into that area, and then being able to say, do we need to look at the dams? Do we need to look at the access? Can we start getting some baseline information on what's happening with the eel population within Kedgie so that we can move forward? Other than that, if you want to go in and you want to fish speckled trout in Kedgie or trout in Cape Breton Highlands National Park, there is no plan that you need. Mi'kmaq, as long as they have their identification, so either a status card or a harvester card that's been issued by the Assembly, are free to fish in whatever lakes and rivers within national parks that they wish. There's no bag limits, none of that. The day may come when the Mi'kmaq decide you need bag limits, but that'll be for whatever they want to do. But at this point in time, for activities like that, it's simply fishing within the national park the same way you would fish outside of the national park. Use of boats are not a problem. The one thing that we did, the knowledge keepers did ask us to put in there was they wanted to see it to be non-motorized boats within the park because they were concerned about the environmental effects. Particularly, sometimes you bring motorized boats and you bring invasive species in with you. So you may be in one lake which may have loose strife or something like that, and it's easy to bring into another lake that doesn't have that contamination. So one of the things they were concerned about is it's easier to clean off and make sure that you're not transporting those things if you're doing things by non-motorized means. So that's the one provision they wanted to put on it. But otherwise, the use of watercraft is not a problem. When it comes to hunting obviously involves particularly safety issues. So one thing we knew off the bat is a specific management plan will have to be developed for moose in Cape Breton Highlands National Park because of everything we talked about with the population. One of the first things that the technical committees and co-management board will have to look at is as we start looking at the population numbers and as we start looking at the availability for healthy populations, is there the availability to start looking at some form of food or ceremonial hunting that can take place within the national park for moose? One of the things that was brought forward at the symposium with the knowledge keepers was the idea of, does the park offer us the ability to work with youth and elders to start developing what youth and elder hunts might look like and have them become a ceremonial attachment to what we're trying to work on in teaching values to youth going forward. That's a possibility. So clearly one of the first things that will have to be done is how do you develop a specific plan on moose to make sure that you are being conservation minded as you go forward. For other species, things like bear or deer, conservation is not an issue. The only issue that comes to those things are public safety. Clearly it is a difficulty in having harvest operations which are close to people who are doing picnics and tours and taking kids out to a kids camp on a point and things like that. So what we're talking about within the stewardship plan is on an annual basis. If communities wish to look, or communities on behalf of their members wish to develop a hunting plan for that season, let's take for an example, a community comes forward and says, we would like to have a deer hunt in Keji this year. What would happen is the community would sit down with parks, and a specific hunter operational plan would be developed. So what point in time do people want to go hunting? What are they looking for? How many days are they looking to do the activity? Who's organizing the activity? And then in the end, what may have to happen is parks would close off certain sections of the park during the harvest activities. The harvest activities would take place with the community, and then parks would reopen that section of the park. So that's one way that we've been looking at trying to prevent any sort of safety issues, accidental hikers, accidental whomever. The other thing, and we learned this with the moose harvest in the park, sometimes there's angry non-natives who aren't too happy with the things that you are doing in the park. And sometimes it's the safety of the harvesters as well that needs to be looked after. So how do you make sure that you're setting off those areas in the park so that things can be done safely? It's anticipated that as it grows every year, communities would come forward with their plans. The plans would be worked out, the harvest would take place, and then away it would go. Now, a lot of people I've talked to, for ordinary harvest purposes, are probably not going to look at the national park. So if I want to hunt deer, I'm probably going to go 5 minutes down the road where I know there's deer. But we also know there's some communities who have said this would be an important cultural reconnection for us when we're talking about reconciliation, to be going back into the park and doing the things that our ancestors did at that particular area. Our ancestors hunted in this area. Our ancestors hunted these various species in this area. And we'd like to reconnect with that, take our youth there and teach them the reconnection with the way the ancestors used this particular landscape. So I anticipate that we will have communities that will look at that and say, yes, we would like some sort of understanding about the way we could bring in our community to look at harvest activities in this landscape. Gathering is the easy one. If you're in a national park and you see some blueberries, pick some blueberries. If you're in a national park and you see fir boughs, pick fir boughs. If you see sweetgrass, pick sweetgrass. It's right now, for a guy like me, I go in and pick a blueberry. Oh my God, it's a federal offense. And this is how crazy it is, because when I started this thing 15 years ago, parks would have prosecuted you for picking that blueberry. Parks would have prosecuted you for picking that blueberry. That's how far I was laughing, talking with Sherry Pictou over lunch. Because I remember working with Frank Muse. He was chief down in Bear River at the time. And we were starting this park stuff. And I thought, oh, parks, man. Can't get more warm and fuzzy than parks. And Chief Frank said, I will never go to that park. I will never go to that park. I will never enter that park. I will never discuss anything with those people from parks. And then he explained to me the past. He explained to me how he was kicked out of the park. Explained to me how he tried to pick some sweetgrass, or he tried to pick a blueberry, and they pushed him out. And he said, I'm just not going back. So it's taken a while. It's taken a while to reconnect some of the things that have happened in the past in a place like a park, and some of the uses. Now, I should say that these stewardship plans are meant to be fluid. The arrangement itself is for 10 years, but a stewardship plan may change year by year, just depending on the species or depending on the resource. Or the Mi'kmaq we used sweetgrass earlier. Maybe the Mi'kmaq come forward and saying, we're a little worried that the sweetgrass is being over-harvested or harvested incorrectly. the Mi'kmaq may come forward and say, we'd like a specific management plan on the sweetgrass because we're a little concerned about the nature of what's happening. But that'll be up for you, your representatives, and the way that you see the park and the way that you see the resources being utilized within the park. But I think the important thing is when we started, I'll never forget what I was told by parks was Indigenous people have no rights inside the park south of 60. This was 10 years ago. That's what kind of started all of this, where we said, you can't even be saying that. I mean, that's not even, how on earth would that ever be true? So the importance of what seemingly now to seem logical and obvious, where Parks is finally saying, yes, you have rights inside the park. Not only rights to resources and the use of resources, but rights to your culture, rights to your language, rights to your self-determination in the way that you access these things. That's been something that's been relatively new. Parks has arrangements of co-management and co-governance with groups in Northern Labrador, Northwest Territories, and Haida Gwaii. But in New Brunswick, PEI, and Nova Scotia, for the first time, parks will start having these relationships in the pre-existing parts south of 60. In other words, all of the other places up north were parks that were just being developed as they made understandings with the First Nations. These are parks that were developed years ago without any consultation with you, without any discussion with you. So this is the first time Parks is sitting down with Indigenous groups and saying, yes, we have to open up co-governance and co-management to the parks that already exist. Because this arrangement is not a treaty and it doesn't define or limit rights, the government still retains the duty and obligation to consult, even with this arrangement in place. So in the event that government decided to make a decision, it goes through the process, and you feel it's still something that the government is trying to do that is outside of what they should be doing, the government still has the obligation to consult with you about what the ramifications of that are. And what we've indicated within the arrangement is, I know at KMK there's a consultation process. I know at Sabinganekedy there's a consultation process. At Millbrook there's a consultation process. Those consultation processes would still be operable, and the government would still have to go through those consultation processes going forward. And just back to the Earthkeeper program, because like I said, as you can see now, there is the possibility going forward of a lot of activities of Mi'kmaq happening within the park. One of our concerns, one that was raised to us, was it's now going to be in a park where there's going to be thousands and thousands of other visitors. How can we start explaining to people who are not Mi'kmaq, who are in the park, what's happening with these activities? If they see Mi'kmaq harvesting, if they see Mi'kmaq doing these things, how can we make it a learning tool for the non-native public so that they understand they are here utilizing this landscape as Mi'kmaq, as they always have. And they're doing it by their rights. They're doing it by their constitutional rights through treaty and Aboriginal rights. So one of the key components of Earthkeepers is going to be that educational understanding. Another key component of the Earthkeepers is, if I'm out fishing in Kedgie Lake, I still have a lot of people in the community that are going to feel real nervous about going up to a parks employee and asking a question. It's just there. I would rather be able to have them go up to a Mi'kmaq Earthkeeper and ask a question, because they're going to feel more comfortable. they're not going to feel like they're somehow getting themselves in trouble. And even though they have the full right to do it and they can do it, I still know I have a lot of harvesters that feel nervous talking to somebody in a uniform about harvesting. And it's just good to see the fact that we'll have those people who are working on the Earthkeeper project present in the park on a constant basis and reintroducing that idea of youth into the park and the activities that they can do and the language of understanding what the language of the park is and how the park can be a landscape that they can enjoy going forward. So that's natural resources. And are there any questions before I kick it over to archaeology?